The broadcast attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome. My name is Julie and I'm with ABC Success. Thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. The topic today is Estimates Review. This is the first in a series of webinars this year and we're pleased that you could join us. A couple of reminders before we get started. First, everyone's audio has been set to mute to keep down the background noise. Please submit questions or comments using the questions box and we will save some time at the end of the presentation today to answer any questions submitted. Secondly, the presentation is being recorded and it will be sent to you following the webinar. Please feel free to share this link with others in your practice who are unable to attend today. Our speakers today are Kim Fish and Scott Anderson, along with Terry Smith with ABC Success. At this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to Kim. Kim?
Thank you so much, Julie. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It's exciting. We're into 2018, and we're starting on this new series. I actually have the entire list of our topics we're going to be covering in 2018 that we'll go over today. So I'm glad that you found estimates to be important enough to register and get some of our input on it. So who the heck are we? Some of you guys have been on for our webinars for years, and for some of you, it's the first time. So welcome. We are a consulting group. There's 9 of us. And we specialize in your AVImark system. We take the data out of it, we compile it into a usable format, because some of these reports you get out of your system are hundreds of pages long, but it helps us to interpret historically what's been happening at your practice, and we'll give you a couple of screenshots of what that looks like, because this is really important information. You know, have you been trending with your performance? You can't have peak performance if you don't know where you started. We also look at setups in your system. We look at what you've actually been doing in your transactions. We're looking for correlation patterns in medicine. And one of the examples we're going to use today is how those correlations show up with the use or not use of your estimates. From there, when you know what's going on at the practice with all that data, we create a plan, a strategy for the practice. Because every one of you guys is a little bit different. What's going to work best for you? And then it takes a combination of training the team and also individual consulting to achieve maximum results. And so with our clients that we do all this, we achieve a 16 to 18% revenue growth with a 14 to 18% profit margin. Now that profit margin is pretty important, whether or not you guys are thinking about selling your practice, okay? The value of your practice starts the day that you open the practice or you buy the practice. And so you always want to be thinking about how strong your trends are and where your profit, margin is at. So what we're going to go over today is a little sample of some of what we do with our clients specific to the estimates, the usage of that in their in the AVImark system. And then also there's going to be a piece that we're going to talk about with the client compliance. So with what you're on here for today with this 2018 webinar series, this is all free for you guys. With this, you also get a coaching session. So if you have not already registered for it, make sure that you can do that. You can put something in the notes when you're logging out today. There's a little pop-up survey. You can also, as I'm going to put it on the screen at the end, there's a website you can go to easily put it onto the calendar. But that coaching session is really important because this is how you're going to help to make sure that you get the pieces that you learned today put in place. Any questions that you have regarding this topic, or really any other topic that you'd like to get addressed, that's what we're here for. This is a support system for you. Okay. Also at the end, I'll remind you that if you'd like to have the worksheet that goes along with this webinar to help you kind of walk yourself through the steps, just let us know about that as well. This is intended to give you a taste of what would be important to you. That's why we call it the Design It Yourself program, because not for a lot of you, the individual consulting is the way to go. And for some of you, you'd like to just do kind of the bits and pieces that you think are important. And that's where the group coaching comes in. So I'll talk about that again in a minute. But this will give you a chance to kind of flavor, what are the topics that might be important to you. So as you go through like the estimates review today with us, you may think, oh, I'm pretty strong here. I think I've got this down. But maybe one of the other topics or more would be of interest to you. And for those of you that think you could really use some help with estimates, which honestly most of you could, we review estimates all the time, this might be a place that you want to take a deeper dive. So this gives you a quick little screenshot of all the topics we're going to be covering. It is, there's a chronology to it in the sense of the different months of the year. For instance, dentistry is going to be the one for next month. It's going to be timely because of Dental Awareness Month. And fee and code review is towards the end of the year, so you can make sure that your fees are, already kind of considered and set up as you go into 2019. Now, these modules are available to you at any time, with the coaching or the consulting, and there is an actual flow that would be optimal to go through. But just so you know that there is a kind of a pace that's based on the calendar here. And so they're all integrated in some way. You're going to hear me talk about several of the modules as we go through today, which means it's important for you to come on for more of these. I mean, they're all free to you anyway. But what you get a piece of here, you're going to have in a different kind of perspective, maybe in one of the other modules, and they all become somewhat interrelated with each other. But as you go through them, like I said, maybe you want to take a little deeper dive into it, and that's where the group coaching can be really helpful for you. So that way you can have a little bit of a slower pace than our individual consulting. It's not going to have all the results, but we still want to accomplish a lot with you. Okay, so if we get 16 to 18% on the individual consulting, maybe you even get like 9%. That's our goal here with the group coaching, that you could get, your revenue up quite a bit there as well. That's actually pretty significant because the national average is 3%. Okay, but it is absolutely our intention that there's a return on investment for you that is better than anything else you can find out there, including Bitcoin. So I think bank on yourselves. That's probably your best strategy for investment. But this group coaching could be a really good opportunity for you, and that's why it's in the new Design It Yourself program that we're putting together for you. So as I'll say at the end, when you are logging out, if this is the topic of interest or one of the others, let us know so we can get you some information on the group coaching. It's pretty cost effective. That one's 2 meetings a month. In the group atmosphere, the individual consulting is 3 meetings per month because it's a little bit more intense. But we get results immediately within the first few months, really turning a practice around. So let's get started on our topic, estimates review. Now, I think there's some terminology we probably want to talk about first with the word estimates, because there's the part of what you present as far as the financial part to a client. There's also the part that's the automation within your system, and there's actually several different ways you can do that inside of AVImark. So we'll try to be clear with, with the semantics in there of, kind of a differentiation between the terms we use in AVImark and some of the just kind of veterinary terms that we use related to all this. So estimates is going to, for the purposes of our conversation today, cover the way that AVImark gets set up, what you present to a client, and even the medical protocol that you're going to be reviewing with the client. So as you saw on the very first slide, as you're waiting patiently for the webinar to start today, we've got a couple of topics. We're going to break it down into 2 simple pieces here. One is making sure your setup in AVImark is optimized, okay? And the other is, how do you take that and relate it to the client in a way that's going to get them to be compliant? And what is the ultimate purpose of all of this? Because you want to stabilize your average charge per transaction, we call it the ACT, and when you stabilize it, you can grow it. And I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like next. But there is a reason for why we're focused on this, because when we go through with our consulting clients, the very first piece that we want to target is getting the average charge, that ACT, to be stable. And when that's stable, then we can go back and work on other things like getting transactions up. We don't want a wash effect of one going up and one going down. We want stabilization of the average charge, and then we want to work on transactions. And while we're doing that, there's a lot of other pieces in there that can help to get the average charge to increase. But having the combination of the automation and the compliance is really important, and I'll talk about it more in just a second here with this chart. If you guys didn't come on for our December webinar, go to our website. We archive all the webinars. There's one in there about the end of year reports to run on your system. Okay, so for instance, there's the period totals report. what we do for our clients, and we also do it for something we call an exploratory analysis. We can run that for any of you guys, give you like a great big report of what's actually been happening at your practice. But we chart out the data that's in there, and we look at 3+ years of history to see what's been happening in your trends is just one part of it. And that trend, the first part is revenue. So what's happening with your revenue? And then we break it into the two pieces that make up revenue, which is this one right here, the average charge per transaction, and the other is the transactions. Okay, so you can interpret this graph as easily as possible. Let's just say it's all by color. Okay, it should be reading orange on the bottom, and then purple in the middle, and then this turquoise blue at the top. And you can see with these average trend lines that that is not the case in this example. This clinic actually went down over 5% from 2016 to 2017. And if 2017 wasn't on here, I could tell you that that was going to happen because the trends leading up to it were showing it. What I want you to look at is the swing that's in here for all of these lines. Scott and I call something like this the ball of yarn. It's like, can you even make out the colors? It's all wrapped into each other. That's not the way it's supposed to look. Optimally, you want to have your swing to be within $10, okay? And you can see on this turquoise blue line for 2017, we've got a high of 155. Awesome. Maybe there was a lot of dentistry that happened in that month, you know? And then we've got a low closer to about 117 in here. That's nowhere near a $10 swing, right? If you go back to the previous years, same thing. I mean, giant swings all over the place. Nothing's all that predictable. The only part that kind of slowed down with the swing was the last few months there of 2017. It's also what's pulling the line down. So actually continuing at that rate is probably going to sit around 125. But if they can get it consistently at 125 and get this thing to stop flying all over the place, the swing of up and down, then they've got room to grow. So it's not about, oh my gosh, look at where I'm at. And of course, don't compare to 125 to you because this may be totally different than your situation. But you have to have a place that you're starting. And you have to know where you're starting. Okay? And then it's a matter of controlling it. And when you control it, then you can add the layers to help build it. So the estimates review topic we're covering today is one of the pieces that really helps to stabilize and then grow this average charge. Okay, but it's got to be sustainable first. None of the things that were happening in 15 and 16 were sustainable. So when this clinic gets stable here, it sits at 125, then they will actually jump up. It usually jumps a $10 growth, and it's going to go to 135. But it'll go back to where it was, and it will be sustainable then. It'll be something they can work off of and continue to grow it. Now, Scott on our team is the one who specializes in all of the analytics, and he's the one that really gets into this data. So, Scott, did you want to chime in on the ACT chart here?
On the ball of yarn?
Yes, ball of yarn.
Yeah, and well, and you know, I think it's just logical, you know, that as we have these fluctuations, whether it's the ACT or the number of transactions, it's hard to manage a business. And so, in my practice, and like Kim implied, I'm kind of the data geek in the group. And one of the things we developed is the ability to capture all of a whole variety of AVImark reports, and then to condense them down to what we feel are the most meaningful elements. But here, that sometimes there are reasons why, you know, an ACT will go up and down. But when I have my monthly finance meeting with my practice, okay, I'll ask the question: is if we had a good month, previous month, how did we do it? If we didn't have a good month, you know, what was the problem? Okay, and so we're constantly looking at charts like this just to say we recognize that there's an issue, and then how are we going to correct it? Because in this particular practice, and their ACT is relatively low anyway, but you know, you just think of the pressures that are on practice operations. When the ACT is high, that means more people in the practice are involved in things. But when the ACT or transaction volume drop, We're not completely malleable in terms of we're not going to cut hours, lay off staff, that kind of thing. So we kind of, as far as management and ownership, bite the bullet. And the estimates are an excellent way to define things. And maybe you're using estimates now, maybe you're not using it, but if you are using estimates, Kim and I are believers that everyone in the practice needs to understand the estimate. And she mentioned earlier, it's not just making sure we charge for everything. It's making sure that everyone in the building can represent and explain the estimate. And we have a client where spent a lot of time creating a bunch of estimates, and I said, well, have you reviewed those with your technicians and receptionists? No, I define it for them. But how many times do we all have the situation where a doctor says something and then the client ends up asking the receptionist, what does this mean? So it's important to go through the estimates. They are your protocols, okay, and explain to associates, to staff, the logic behind them. And it's interesting at times in that process. And we've even had our kennel staff come up with suggestions of, why aren't we charging for XYZ? And it creates a nice interactive dialogue within the practice. Kim?
Yeah, thanks, Scott, because these are the things that we're going to be talking about today. And there is going to also be a future webinar in this month, and that list that I had put on the screen earlier on creating standard medical protocols. So we'll talk about it a little bit today, but that is a core piece to getting the rest of this in there. You've got to be standardized to some degree with the way you practice medicine too. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So the point is that we want to have this estimate stuff really working like a well-oiled machine in the practice for both parts, like the way it's automated in the system and the way we present it to the client to get compliance, because ultimately we're trying to drive a stable and growing average charge. That's it in a nutshell. Okay, so let's start off talking about just creating them to begin with. Now, the pieces that go into creating a treatment plan or estimate or whatever you want to call it, it starts with your treatment list, right? And for those of you guys that are really good at going through your treatment list, wonderful. And for a lot of you, you've either had the list for a long time without too much review or you inherited a list. It's actually the very first thing with our consulting clients is we go through line by line on that treatment list and help clean it up. It's a matter of understanding what's being used, what's not being used. Do we have duplication of use? Do we have definition of use? That's going to come up again when we talk about the correlation patterns we look for in the data. It's very interesting. But you've got to have a solid treatment list before you can ever start looking at the estimate you want to build, right? Because these are the building blocks of putting all of that together. Having definition of use of those, though, is really important. How are you going to use them? Just for instance, if you bundle some things, so let's say that you've got, I'm just going to use a simple example, an injection that's a service, and it's connected to an inventory item, then how are you going to use that, and is that going to be fit into some of these other kind of groups or estimates that you want to create? There's so many ways of putting these things together, but what does it actually include? Okay, because let's say that this is an injection for anesthesia. This is your pre-anesthetic or something like that. You want to be really clear on what it all includes. Scott, you'll probably expand on this story a little bit because it's happened more than once too, that on review we found that it was not clear among all the doctors about with the surgery whether it included anesthesia or not. So this is a really big one. If everybody thinks that or is clear that we charge separately for anesthesia versus surgery, great. But if you've got a situation where some of the people think that anesthesia is automatically included and are not adding it in there, well, how do you have consistency there? And so we've got one really big case of it, and another one, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars of loss that it added up to. So you've got to go through to know that it even exists to begin with. Make sure that you're clear on your definitions and your team is clear on the definitions of how these things are put together.
And that example that Kim gave, it so happened that I was able to visit that practice, a 7-doctor practice. All the doctors had been in the practice for 5 years or more, and 2 of the 7 were what Kim pointed out is that after I looked at the data and we, our consulting group went through the data, it was obvious that we look at it in terms of overall revenue by category, by producer, that kind of thing, that a couple of the producers were not performing, shall we say, or charging for certain services like anesthesia. And I happened to be sitting right next to the owner of that practice, who, when we discovered this, almost fell out of the chair. Okay, and then he went into a rant. But what Kim's saying is your treatment list is really obviously critical in this, and AVImark has reports that are very good. You can run reports that will tell you when a particular treatment was last used. Okay, and so it gives you the tools, and one of the ones I like best in AVImark is the transaction journal. Now, for your practice, the transaction journal probably automatically prints every day, and people take it, put a clip around it, staple it, throw it in the file cabinet. But what in my practice, not every day, but we will make it an event where we will pull the transaction list and look at, say, for Tuesday, yesterday, what we charged for, and we'll bring up the client patient record on the screen, and we'll talk about did we first charge for everything that should have been done, and it's amazing how little charges aren't there, hence include them in an estimate, and then to look to see that, with the client patient record on the screen, if we set up the next opportunity to have the patient visit, whether it's a recall, a reminder, that kind of thing. So AVImark gives you all the tools, and if you use the transaction journal and you're not currently using estimates, then well, what it'll also show you is you built an estimate, but nobody's using it. Okay, and that's always kind of interesting. Spend a lot of time developing it, and it's not getting used. So you've got the tools. We can help you interpret the tools and refine it. Kim?
Yeah, that last point, Scott, is exactly right, because before you can go to the next piece, you think that the next part is like, let's just jump into doing the estimates. We started talking about making sure your treatment codes are in order. You've got to even know if you're using your estimates, because it is not if you build it, they will come. Okay, you've got to build them and use them. So part of what we do in our data analysis is not just those trends. We break it down into dollar amount, percentage, quantity. We look at it across the board. There's a lot of different ways of analyzing it. This is just a quick little example on the screen. I know it's a little small, but I'll, again, just describe it with the color combinations that are here. We're looking for patterns of how, if you were to be using the estimate, for instance, on dentistry, does it look like it's showing up here? Do these quantities match up? Does it make sense? And this is where, like when Scott's talking about the lack of anesthesia, it shows up when we're looking for correlation patterns. If we think so many procedures were being done and then we don't have the match between surgery/dental and anesthesia, then there's something amiss. Okay? You've got to know how you're actually using them, if at all. Don't just assume that you are. Okay? So we always look at that piece first, because we have to understand what's going to be the best way to set up the estimate so that it gets used, right? It gets used consistently and it gets used accurately. So looking at your own protocol compliance is a really important step here, and I think most people skip it because, like the transaction journal that Scott was talking about, can give you this information. It is a very heavy, detailed report, and it may be too difficult for you to actually manage. This is one of the benefits of the exploratory analysis, because we do all that for you, and we give it to you in a format like this so you can actually see the breakdown on the quantity of things that you've done, and we show you the correlation patterns that we look for, because this is what we do. We review data. You've got to understand how your performance is going before you ever achieve peak performance.
And the transaction journal can be daunting, and you don't need to go through the whole thing every day. Okay, now there's the reason to see, did we charge for things? Did we set up the next visit or a reminder? But again, part of it, to Kim's earlier point, it comes down to communication. So if I look at yesterday's transaction journal and bring up the client patient on the screen, and that I can say, well, what did we say to, Mr. Smith as far as the procedure? Dentistry is a good one, because so happens this morning at 7:30 I was in the dental chair of my dentist, okay, who, while my mouth's propped open and numb, is lamenting to me how much it costs to have his cat's teeth cleaned. and so I talked to him afterwards, and are we communicating all the components? And some practices, my practice has used a handout that says, that doctor recommended this. Here's what's involved. Okay, here's what happens if you don't, follow through. And we have a client where a new client that I showed them last week. Their dental revenue alone was low. Okay, and I showed them that a little more than half of their dental revenue came from extractions, not from cleaning and polishing. That's quite a message to convey to your doctors, because I have a friend who's a dental specialist, a veterinary dental specialist, and she visited my practice and used the term malpractice. And I said, you're not going to mention that to my doctors. And she said, yes, I am. But it's all the process of going through, which our exploratory can help you do, of kind of catch up in data, okay, where you don't have to go back yourself. That chart Kim showed you earlier that had 3 years worth of data, okay, for you to sit down and do that, okay, is going to take a lot of time, okay, and for you to tear apart the transaction journal is going to take a lot of time. What we try to do for our clients, and we do it every month, is streamline that process so we can really get to and address key elements of practice production, and the ACT is one of those. Kim?
Okay, good review. So now we've got our our treatment list reviewed. We've looked at how we've been using our treatments. So now it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty of the estimates. Now, so you understand with AVImark, you can pull up an estimates report. Just go to Work with Estimates and you can print it up. If you do things in bundles, now I know that every system calls it differently, but if you go into your treatment codes, double left click on a treatment code and you go up there on the top tab, grouped entries, associated items, that kind of thing. If you create that kind of trail where you're connecting treatment codes or inventory codes to a treatment code, there is not a report for that for you to review. So if you're going to do it that way, I would recommend you make a category within your treatment list for, call it treatment groups or whatever you want it to be. Because that way, when you're creating things that are kind of bundled together, like these mini groups, you can keep them all in one place and you can see it. Otherwise, you won't even know they exist until you happen to come across them. Okay? And keep in mind another thing about AVImark. One is you can adjust your prices, obviously, with your treatment codes. It'll show up in those kind of treatment bundles in your estimates. Once you put it over into the estimate, you lose some of the ability to update prices. You put it into a record, it's kind of stuck like that. So you may consider a hybrid between creating like those little treatment groups and creating the estimate. And I'm also going to talk about breaking it into smaller pieces. It gives you a little bit more flexibility. So we'll get into some more detail about it in just a minute. But when it comes to reviewing these things, what you already have in the system, that's the point here, is if you're going to be looking at your treatments, instead of having to search, for the needle in the haystack, put them into a category. You can see them all in one place then. You'll know what exists. Otherwise, you can go print off your estimate list. If you're not using these estimates, archive them or get rid of them. clean this list up to just what it is that you are really using, okay? And look at your naming technique. You know, don't have it called canine neuter in one place and dog neuter in another place. And also be really aware when you have related groups or estimates, because if you make a change in one place, you've got to make a change in all the places. You want to have as much consistency with what's in these things as possible, how they're being charged, and the order that they're put in. This is a super common issue because we review people's estimate reports and things like that as well. And I mean, there's just always discrepancies within it. And how many times do things go through missing something? I looked at one today, and I know that she's got a medication administration charge in a bunch of groups, but then she didn't have it in the other half of the groups. I was like, oh, whoops, we missed it. Is it a big deal? Well, you add it up, right? If you're missing one thing, imagine all the other things that you're missing. That's why we look for what's missing. It gives us an indication of to what degree could this thing be really off. Okay, you want to be on top of it. That's part of what we're trying to achieve today, is real consistency. If you don't have the consistency with this, how are you ever going to have consistency with your average charge? Okay, so go through this list, clean it up, get it down to what you want it to be, and itemize for yourself what you would like to add to it. You've got to have a plan before you start getting in there and doing this stuff, or you're going to be all over the place with it.
Okay, I got it.
Okay. All right, let's go on to, this one's kind of the meat of creating the estimate. Okay, that when you're going through and you're doing your review and you see that there's a bunch of things that are related. This is just an example. Clinic had a whole bunch of kind of sedation. We're just calling them, groups, because like I said, you could do it as a medical treatment with the associated items. You could do it as an estimate. Whatever way you've put it together, the point is you can have a whole bunch of things that are so similar to each other. What's really different between them? If we open it up, you'd probably find that there was one difference, one line item difference among all of them. How about if you just streamline it down to one, and if you're going to have something kind of variable in there, there's different ways of addressing it. One would be that you could have, it's better to put the stuff in line item delete than have to remember to add something to it. So you could make something a little bit more generic that might help. That's one of the points. The other point I want to make here is that this is an example of having kind of a mini group. So like for clinic today, when we were going through a dental estimate, the way that the fluids, well, let's see, all the pre-anesthetic things that were in there, it was inconsistent from one of the estimates to the next, or one of the groups to the next. And so what we talked about is just making a kind of mini group for that, and then she could import it into the estimate instead when she's creating it. So she can create it as like a treatment group, right? And then just bring it into all of her estimates, especially when you get into general surgery, because there's so many different options you could have there. What if you just made a general surgery one and then you added in the individual line item for what kind of surgery it actually was, but just put the rest of the pieces together? Really think about what is the string of consistency that you want from one of these bundles or one of these groups or estimates to the next. And don't keep reinventing the wheel every time, because when you do that, that's where at some point in the future you're going to want to have to make a change, and you've got to go back through every single one of those things again. So if instead, like I'm using the example with her when we did the pre-anesthetic stuff, if she created a treatment group for that, those prices will always keep updated, right? And then she can import that into her estimates. It's a whole lot easier to make one change in one place that feeds the other, as opposed to having to go into every single estimate and hopefully get it right. It's really common to make mistakes. Either different codes get used, omission of codes, different order. Like I said, there's so many things that can go wrong with it. And we want this to be nice and clean and accurate. And I think Terry was able to come on with us. So Terry, thanks for joining us. I don't know if you had something that you want to add in here. By the way, Terry is like, she specializes in flow and the way that these things, get used in the practice. So.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. Sorry I wasn't able to be on from the start. I was just wrapping up another consulting meeting, and I've just been on just for a few minutes, so I need to get my bearings about where you guys are in the discussion. So sorry, I don't have anything to comment on right now.
Okay, well, I'm sure there's going to be more opportunity here, especially because the next part after this is about the communication with the client. So, okay, so once we've got everything built the way that we want, now we have to use it. Okay, now this is not just automatically print it off, give it to the client, and hope that they say yes, or worse, because this came up on a case I went over on Monday, email it to the client and hope they get back to you and schedule. You know how many dentals are getting scheduled like that? They don't. Okay, we're going to go through with you the best way to get client compliance here. And it takes getting the system set up first. That's why we did the first half. And now we're going to talk about getting that buy-in, because ultimately you've got to have the buy-in in order for the client to say yes and to get it scheduled. You want to get scheduled to bring that pet through the door and get them what they need. Now, at the very end of this section right here, I'm going to have the three main things you want to focus on, some statistics you want to try to achieve. So you've got some goals set for yourself, but just some places to be thinking about as we go through the example here of how to go through the steps. One is dentistry. I mean, when you get dental figured out, you've got everything figured out. Just keep replicating that method, okay? But getting rechecks is another one, and getting blood work, like senior blood work done. It all falls under a very similar method like this, okay? That it always starts with buy-in. It starts with doctor down, okay? Doctor's got to get this piece done in order for the rest of it to happen. Everybody's got their kind of responsibility in this process, and if it's not happening for you, which is not happening for a lot of people, that's why the dental average in our country is so low. Our percentage is only 2.5% of revenue is dentistry, and we wanted over 4, okay? It's because there's some piece or pieces that need to get addressed in there. That's why this is a very important module that you guys came on for today, and hopefully you participate in the group coaching that'll get you through it to really help you put all of this together at your practice so that you can get that compliance to improve. Oh, that last sentence, in case you didn't read it, did say you need to use your estimates, so don't just build them. We actually have to use them. So ask yourself right now, why are clients not complying? What are all of their reasons? Really sit and think about it for a minute, because your reasons are probably a lot like everybody else's reasons that are on with us today. Okay, and we've all experienced it, and maybe there's more than what's on this list too, because the reasons we have to be able to turn around. Okay, there's some piece or pieces missing to prevent the compliance from happening. Because when we can solve all of these things, then what's left? Oh, yeah, they're going to schedule. That's what we want to get it to. Okay. And I'm just going to go through some of this that we've got just for examples here, but think about what you guys are hearing for feedback. Okay. So often, the staff didn't even know that they needed to schedule something. So maybe the doctor knew in their head. Maybe doctor wrote it in a medical record. Was it in a really clear format that was an instruction from the doctor to the technician, receptionist, whoever's going to be scheduling, and we'll talk about who should be doing it, but an instruction to them to get this scheduled? Make sure that is in there. Yeah, go ahead, Terry.
I was just going to say, so definitely at this point, you do not want to rely on the client to go up to the front desk at checkout and say, oh, Dr. Jones recommended a dental, I need to schedule that. They're not. You guys want to make sure that you are being proactive, and it's one of your team members who are trying to get that appointment made. Don't leave it up to the client.
Yeah, that's such a good point. If you leave it up to the client, no wonder maybe it doesn't happen, right? We have to be the ones in charge of this.
Well, and I think too, in this review process, an important factor, and it overlaps into other areas too, is if the client didn't buy into the estimate or the proposal, that to talk to the staff to find out why. Okay, and so it's not just they didn't want to do the dental. Okay, it's why didn't they want to do the dental? Because they spent money today, they don't want to spend more money next week. But you can book it for a month out, and that I'll speak a little for Terry, that we've known each other when she and her husband owned a practice, that the follow-up was excellent as far as what Terry did managing the practice in finding out, did we present it correctly? Why didn't the client go for it? And then it's management's decision, do we need to make a modification to the estimate or the recommendation to get greater acceptance? And I think in Terry's practice, acceptance was good. So
we had a dental compliance. Ours was about 6%. So we know that the national average is around 2.5%. We had about 6% of our revenue came from dentistry.
Which is the example that if you can get 6%, you can do it everywhere else in the clinic. That's what you guys are after. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Which is so excellent. But you do have to know where you're at right now. Okay? So that's going to be important. Don't forget you've got to have a baseline. Whether you do it or we can do it for you with the exploratory analysis. The second point here is, gosh, this has got to be one of the most important things. Maybe the staff do know that they're supposed to schedule, but they're left feeling like they're the ones that have to sell the service. One of the things we're going to talk about here is the estimate is not, the paper estimate or electronic estimate is not the tool for selling it. Okay? So if we put the staff in that position, then it's not going to happen. How many of us like selling stuff, right? That's not fun. It gives you that icky feeling a lot of times. We're there to practice medicine. We want to be pet advocates. That's where we want to be coming from. So let's look at that as we go through the process. Estimate is expensive. Well, make sure you're clear that this is different than the next one. Client does not have the money. Money and expense are two totally different things because the first one is about value. Does the client value what we're talking about? And I should take another step back, and this came up when we did the webinar yesterday for another software, but does the staff value it? Like if your staff doesn't buy into the prices, then how are they ever going to go over it? Okay, so we're going to talk about that one too. If the client doesn't have any money, there are solutions around that. If it gets down to any sort of delay, this should be the only thing in place. It does not change the fact that the animal needs this service. It is medically recommended. We want to get it done. It needs to be done. And we price our services properly so it should have value. The rest of it is on us about how we end up presenting it. And then look to see if they gave any other excuse. Because if they did, it probably means that they didn't have enough information for them to say yes. And that's why we're going to go through the steps here next about how to get this done. Step 1. This is the most important step in the whole thing. And I'll tell you, I bet a lot of people are actually skipping it. Okay. This is the diagnosis stage. So let's say the doctor's in doing the examination and finds a problem and wants to do something about it. It could be the recheck exam. It could be that the animal, maybe the problem is just in risk assessment. They realize the animal's over, let's say, 7 years of age. It's a senior geriatric, and we want to do blood work. Okay? Maybe it's that they saw the animal has periodontal disease. Whatever the condition is, if we don't stop at this point and make sure that the client understands what the issue is and that it has an impact if we don't do the other stuff, you will never get compliance. Okay? This is where buy-in happens. And so let's use dentistry as the example. So if doctor diagnoses periodontal disease, and it's great when you can show them the mouth and then you get that odor, you get back, oh, there's bacteria in there. What does it mean? Because we don't want the client just thinking it's, about aesthetics. We want them realizing it is a medical problem. Periodontal disease, by the way, is the leading cause of death. Why? Because of systemic bacterial infection. Might blame it on other organ failure, but it certainly could have started in the mouth, which means we need to resolve the mouth. Okay? If the client doesn't get the impact of leaving something undone or untreated, then there's no room for them to say yes. Okay, so great. Show them all these things. Go over it with them. But you have to actually create a pause in time at this point to get them to digest it, to register it so that they can be in agreement. So if you just are like in that rush, because especially if we don't like the uncomfortable silence, okay, and we're trying to get on to the next point, then you may miss the part of letting the client just digest the buy-in. Okay? Because once we have that, then we can talk about the step 2, which is what are we going to do about it. We have a compliance training, that we do. This is a really important module because we're giving you like the quick little summary on it. Hopefully you can put these steps in place, but I hope that you also see how important this is. Think about how many things are left undone. Every time we say the animal needs something and it doesn't happen, it's undone. This is so important, this step.
Can I jump in here, Kim, for
Sure.
a second? So when you guys are reviewing these estimates, particularly on a dentistry, a lot of it is going to come across in your tone or in the tone by the technician. So, none of us have a problem talking about an orthopedic surgery that needs to happen on a dog that has a broken leg, but somehow we have difficulty speaking in that same with that same conviction. A lot of times we'll use things like, you got periodontal disease, you might want to think about having the teeth cleaned, where you would never say that when a dog's got a broken leg. Your dog has a broken leg, you might think about having it set, having it repaired. So think about that when you're talking to people. You're certainly not trying to use scare tactics to scare people, but just think about your delivery when you're talking to them. Are you making it sound like it's an either or kind of thing? You want to talk very positively and very convicted that this needs to happen.
That's such a good point because it's really the seriousness of how we convey it. Take, for instance, grade 1 dental. For some of you guys, you buy into it, and for some of you, you don't. And if you don't really buy into it, then how's the client ever going to be convinced? So Terry's right. It's like about your level of conviction. If you treat it like it's medically important and that's why you're talking about it, then the client's going to get a greater impact with that. If you're kind of on the fence, client's going to be on the fence. Okay, so be really clear with yourself first. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Well, and there's, the crossover thinking on the human side. There's a national ad that's running right now to promote dental implants. And the individual they interview says that his cardiologist will not see him again until he gets his teeth fixed. Okay, and that's a big selling point, because if the teeth aren't going to get fixed, then in your dog, then you're going to have problems down the road. And the staff have to be convinced of it. In my practice, for up to 3 pets, we do a part of their benefit is a dental every year, and the staff promote dentistry like crazy. That this was my dog's teeth, and now that the dog's great. And when we begin talking about, if you don't do something about this, a little bit of a scare tactic, that we're going to be extracting teeth. And nobody likes to hear that teeth are going to be extracted. And so you can be a little dramatic, but not threatening.
Yeah, see, it just gets back to the conviction again, and it's all about medicine. That's why I said we're pet advocates. We're there to make sure the animal gets what it needs, and we just stand behind that. Okay, so let's go to step 2. We've got the buy-in. Now we're going to address it with what are we going to do about it, okay? And it still stays in the realm of the need, right? So animal needs this. One of the things we'll keep talking about, and you guys are going to probably recognize how often you say it, is that there's a very passive way to address this that's so common, is to say, would you like to, right? Or like, Terry was saying about the conviction, what if you were instead like, well, maybe, maybe isn't your pet needs it. I like the way that one of our clients, phrases things. It's always like, let's do this. It's kind of like, let's join together to make sure that this happens for the animal. So it doesn't come off like, a direct, like, you better do this kind of thing. And it sure doesn't come off in the passive, maybe if you'd like to, right? So think about how you're speaking, whether you're doctor, manager, staff, whatever it is, that this is all for the intention of making sure the animal gets what it needs. Okay, this is not the point that money is described. This is medicine. And I have over here on the right, it says doctor in parentheses, because the doctor talks about the medicine. The doctor, we recommend, should not be talking about the money. Keep the two apart from each other. Do not collapse the two. because in order to make sure you're establishing need, you've got to stay talking about medicine, and do not talk about money, because that's going to blur stuff. Okay? I also think that, to be clear, that it should be the doctor here, because I know sometimes technicians, it's part of the process that the technician kind of determines what the animal is going to get. If it works for you guys, let's say for pre-surgical, I'm sorry, for senior blood work, the technician talks to him. That might work in some cases. It depends on how your flow is. But for a lot of you, it really gets back to when the doctor's going through examination, which includes risk assessment. That's the conversation that occurs at that point. Most of this medical conversation happens under the doctor with technician support, just to be clear. It should not be that the doctor relies on the technician to do all of that. Technician should be the support for that. Okay, so now we've talked about, the why and what we're going to do about it. Okay, everybody's clear this needs to be done. Okay, so the debate is not in there anymore, which means no one has to sell anything. Now it's just a matter of transparency of what this is going to cost. That's all estimate presentation is. It's just showing them the numbers that go along with it, and that's where the technician comes in to review it. And I know some of these estimates are pretty difficult to work on. Okay, that's why that dental module that we're going to be doing next month will be really important, because dentistry is the hardest estimate of all of them to create, because you've got the unknown of extractions that get involved in there, and maybe some injections and all of that kind of stuff, go home stuff. Okay, so when the technician is reviewing it, they should not be emailing it. Like I said, it's going through it together. A little side note is it does help if physically they're standing side by side on the same side of the table, because it gets back to the let's do this together kind of thing. We're in it together. Okay, and it doesn't have to be every line item read in monotone. You can kind of chunk it, summarize it, here's what it comes to, and we should not be apologetic in any way of what this thing costs, because I don't think we've yet to come across a doctor that was price gouging, just overcharging. There's different areas that that obviously can charge more than others. I think when you have price differences, it probably has more to do with the completeness of all of the services that we're doing in there, okay, and what we're charging for. There's a zillion ways of doing this stuff. No two of you guys are alike when it comes to this, believe me. So it's really important, though, that we've looked at the price structure, we've looked at how it goes into the estimate, that the technician understands the value of it, and then we get to the client understands the value of it. There should not be a question of why this thing came to whatever amount it is, because if that's what it came to, that's because that's what the animal needed. Okay? And then we get to the last step, which is scheduling it. Now, because all of this conversation theoretically happened in the exam room, owner is still medicine-minded, okay, thinking about the medical need for their animal, what we need to do about it. It is optimal if you can schedule it while they're in the room. Now, a dental might be easier to schedule because you already somebody looked at the schedule beforehand, said, oh, we can fit it in on Thursday, and you go in and say, okay, it looks like we can fit Fluffy in on Thursday, right? It was never like a would you like to schedule. It's a medical instruction that we need to get this done. If it's something else, it may require that you look at the system, whether it's in the room or outside of the room. But the more you can get scheduled from inside the room, the better, because as soon as they leave that room, I say amnesia settles in. Okay, even by the time they get up to the front desk. And so if they are going to go to the front desk to get scheduled, like Terry said before, let's not put it on the owner to tell the person that they need to schedule something, because that doesn't happen. Okay, there needs to be a verbal instruction in front of the owner and in front of the person who's going to be scheduling that basically doctor said this is what we need to do. Right?
And that could be done in the form of a handoff. I don't know, if a technician is taking a chart up to the front desk for checkout, the technician can, briefly go over with the receptionist that today Dr. Jones, Dr. Jones recommended a dentistry, so we need to get that appointed. So you're passing that information along to the receptionist, yet you're doing it in front of the owner, so it's just another reinforcement of the recommendation.
Yeah, that's great. That's what we need to do. So have some sort of handoff. Okay, but it's very clear to everybody what it is we're trying to do. And this is not the part of selling because it's already been decided. We're just getting to the part of getting it scheduled.
Oh, and I'll make a comment too, as Terry mentioned before. It's kind of a hierarchy in your estimates. Some things like a broken leg that Terry mentioned, a bloat, a lump, that eye problem. Those are things we have to take care of, and so it's a good place to start the estimates because that those are obvious things that have to be attended to now. The dental is deserves more description to the staff, to the client, and so if you're not using estimates, you can start with some of your standard surgical procedures and get the rhythm developed. Okay, and we're not talking about putting 150 things on an invoice. You want to have it understandable by the client and the staff.
Exactly. Just a little side note here about what happens when your estimate does not sufficiently cover what actually gets charged. Make sure that you allow for some flexibility in there when you're creating it. Okay, so that we're not trying to create an expectation that this is like a hard and fast number. And there's various ways that you can do that, and especially in AVImark, because you can put in variances and things like that. Okay. And then there may also be the part where maybe we need to call them during a procedure to make sure that they're on board with everything. And just like I said before, make sure you're not ever saying, would you like to? Wait till you see how often you catch yourself saying that going forward. You're like, oof, how could you rephrase that? And the more you catch yourself and the more you try the other, you're going to find you're going to be a lot more successful in your communication with the clients. So here's the part I was talking about, like the 3 places you really want to focus on in getting client compliance, because you get this down, you get a lot of it, the rest of it down. So when you're having some goals for yourself, first one's recheck exams. Now, when we do an exploratory analysis, this is one of the numbers we either run or try to run. It's not always that clear to us because some of you guys combine your sick and well exams. There's multiple reasons you do not want to do that. If you're not sure why or you're not sure about your exam codes, that may be one of the topics you want to talk about in your free coaching session. Okay, because this is a really important part. You want to have very clear definition of use to all of your exam codes. And honestly, when I go through correlation patterns and look at it for the exploratory analysis, I know when you guys don't have clear definition of use, and it's super, super common. Okay, if your recheck percentage is really high, I'm not going to believe it, to tell you the truth. It probably means you're misusing some of the codes, or you don't have the clear definition. So if you really are, like you've got a sick pet and they come back in for a recheck, this is the percentage I'm talking about, that we want it to be 30%, maybe a little bit higher, okay? For most of you guys, it's probably going to be closer to 18%. So you need to know that number. Again, whether you run it or we run it for you, know where you're at with it. Okay, and here's your goal. On dental, 2.5% is the national average. We want you over 4, and you want to be a rock star like Terry, go for 6. Okay, that's strong conversion. And then on the wellness labs, doing senior blood work is really important. When you get that down, you can do other kind of routine labs as well. This is just one place specifically to focus on. Well, how about if we try to get 1 in 5 of the seniors to do this? You do this compliance method, especially during your risk assessment part of your exam, and this is what you want to accomplish with it. And if you're not, again, that's where you want to look into getting the coaching or do the group coaching class to get your numbers up. What a difference it can make for your practice. Aren't you guys here to make a difference, right? There's some goals for you. Now, there is a question that's in here that I want to make sure I address, because this is probably common for a lot of you, and then I'll go through this slide here. About when you've got a client that is focused on the money. So doctor's trying to talk about that the animal needs something, and the client's like, hey, how much is this going to cost? Okay. What you have to realize is the client is trying to dictate the order of conversation here. And you've got to take control again. We're not talking about money yet. If they're jumping ahead to money, then they miss the buy-in. You've got to bring it back to the medicine. They can't have a money conversation until we've had a medicine conversation. They need to be really clear that it doesn't matter how much this thing costs, it still needs to be done. Okay? If it's about, they have to figure out how, if they have enough money, that comes after everything. Okay? What they're asking when they're saying, well, how much is this going to cost, is they're trying to determine if it's worth it or not. And we don't ever want that running through their head. It's got to get back to the medicine. Then we show them the value of the services with the estimate. And then you go on down that road. And then if they don't have enough money, then what's the solution? Well, that's what we save up money for, right? Maybe they have a savings plan. Maybe they use care credit. Whatever it is, that's at the end. That should be like the only excuse for putting something off. So don't let the client run the show with this conversation, because it means they absolutely miss the medicine part. So I hope that helps. And to the person that posed the question, maybe that's one of the things you want to talk a little bit more about in your free coaching. So make sure you get it scheduled if you didn't do it already. And I think this is a really common issue that happens in the exam rooms. And I know it's uncomfortable having that little pause after the buy-in part, saying that this is what's wrong and this has a serious impact on the animal, or could. We need to do something about it. But it's actually needed for the client. They've got to get it. We don't want to rush that process. Okay. And there was a question earlier about if there's a handout for this. There absolutely is. So when you guys are checking out, when you close out on the webinar today, put down that you want the worksheet that goes with it, because that'll help you to kind of guide yourself along with the steps that you want to do for this particular module. And then if you want to go deeper with it, that's when you can do the the group coaching and get in there and really get some help putting all of this together, because you're going off your own experience and doing your best guess at if you're doing it right or not. We're here to help you with it. This is what we do. Okay, we know the steps that will help to make it turn around for you and get the numbers you're looking for. All right. Make sure you schedule that free coaching session if you haven't done so already. So either do it at the end here, or you can go to calendly.com/KimFish and put on the calendar. Go directly onto the calendar, and then I'll call you. The exploratory analysis is one of the most important things that we do, because this is how you know what's been happening in your history, and that you can have a plan then coming out of that, because you have to understand the good, the bad, and the ugly, okay, of what you're going to do about it going forward. Here we are at the beginning of 2018, New Year's resolutions. New Year's resolutions aren't just about goals, it's about resolving things, right? You have to know what's going on at your practice to resolve to begin with. So that's why this is so important to get this data. And actually, it in itself has a very, very good return on investment for you. I've never had anyone come back and say it wasn't completely worth getting that information, because we give you some plan steps in there as well. But know, how you've been performing and why, because that's going to set you up to achieve your peak performance. Okay? We talk about group coaching, talk about the individual coaching, the individual consulting. I mean, if getting a 16 to 18% revenue growth for your practice sounds of interest, then you should do it. And it's not meant to make more work for you, because we're actually looking for how we can make things more efficient as well. We want a good work-life balance to achieve this. And that can be really significant for your practice. Okay, so make sure you just mark whatever it is that you need. That's what Design It Yourself is all about. When you're looking for your peak performance, what do you think is going to be important for you? Because that's what we're here to help you with. And we specialize in your AVImark system, so we can help you to make sure that that thing is ultimately utilized to its potential. Make it work really well for you and for your team, and get everybody on the same page so you can get your peak performance.
Kim, if I can make a comment just as a former practice owner.
Sure.
The exploratory analysis can seem very overwhelming, but I know one of the biggest frustrations for me was at the end of the year was trying to just pick out these goals and where do I need to go. And the exploratory analysis really takes the guesswork out of that. And so for me, it actually decreased my stress level and my anxiety because I had numbers in front of me that told me specifically this is where I need to go. And I wasn't just grasping at straws, if you will. So I think you'll find the exploratory analysis very, very helpful in many ways, if that's something that you want to consider doing to help move forward in 2018 with some direction that you have the data to back up that this is the direction you need to go in.
It's such a good point, Terry, so thank you, because end of year reports is stressful. And don't just print them and put them in a box, Let's make them utilizable. There's some really good information in there that can help direct your practice. And that's what this exploratory analysis is designed to do. And you don't really have to do anything. You just kind of sit back and get everything run for you. We put the whole report together. It's very extensive. And then we review it with you, and you get a copy of it, so that way you know exactly what's been happening at your practice. So thank you guys so much for coming on and spending this time with us, and we really look forward to having you on for the rest of the webinars in this series here in 2018, and get in and dive deeper into some of the topics that are really important to you. That's what we're here to help you with. Okay, so have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to talking with you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.